Hi, my name is Sam. I'm the Grand Prospirator of corporate learning. This is the first time I've actually filmed outdoors, so I'm a little bit nervous, just around who's looking. Anyhow, recently I've been taking a MOOC on the current and future state of higher education. And this week, what we're covering in this MOOC is some of the driving forces or factors for change of the higher education sphere. What I find interesting is that so far most of the forces that have been talked about is really what you would find in your general PEST or STEPL kind of analysis. You know, this framework has gone through many iterations, but essentially looking at kind of your political, economic, social, technical types of forces on the industry. But I think actually deeper than some of these forces is some of the underlying values of the confluence, I think, of three spheres. And these spheres to me are one, business; two, government or public policy; three, education. And a lot of the forces actually, when looked in isolation, I think miss the mark because it really is a system. Too often there's kind of transformation or reform talked about, and they really only look at one aspect of these three without realizing that any impact to one of the spheres can have impact on the others. And so I think there really needs to be some clarity around, well, what is the specific challenge that we're trying to address, and how do all these three spheres kind of come into play. I think that also there's a number of underlying kind of assumptions that are found that are not really talked about. I think a lot of the articles that we've been reading to date have been dealing with surface level issues. But when you look at these three spheres, there are underlying assumptions. For example, in the business sphere, there is an assumption that education can be run like a business. So we can drive greater accountability through rewards and punishments. We can use technology because it's more scalable and it's cost effective over the long run. And you know, this whole kind of area of pragmatism, I think there's a certain perception amongst the business world that professors tend to be disconnected from reality, and so they feel that they're in a better position to really look at pragmatically where do students work coming out of the education system. So this also leads to an underlying value and again an assumption that business has that students go to university so that they can get a good job, and this probably comes from the fact that a lot of business only hires students with degrees. When you look at the other sphere, government and public policy, some of the forces there are that you have a decreasing tax base, and there's now discussions that are happening around whether to, like, how to allocate some of these scarce public funding. And it comes down to, you know, thinking about, okay, so do I invest in healthcare or do I invest in education? These are two of the major spends within government. And when you think about the largest voting population, the boomers, well, they're going to care more about healthcare. There's also a kind of a perception that's growing that at the end of the day, your education and higher education tends to be a private versus a public good, and this is actually a change from the past. So these things impact kind of public policy. From an education standpoint, I find this one really interesting because when we're talking about higher education, all of a sudden you have a lot of kind of post-secondary institutions talking about teaching excellence and teaching. But when you talk to a lot of professors, you know, they're more focused on research than they are teaching. Teaching is kind of an addendum to the job. And I think this, other than kind of financial reasons for kind of this phenomenon, is also like a desire by professors to do less teaching. So you have actually more adjuncts and sessionals. And yes, it is more cost effective because from a university standpoint, they no longer have to pay for benefits. They no longer have the long-term commitments that they have to professors. And from a professor side, they see adjuncts being able to take on some of the load. But I think it's interesting that a lot of talk has come out of, well, we need to have, like, the existing system has a lot of focus on teaching excellence, when in fact I would say that a lot of the focus right now is on research. Another thing that's happening in the education sector that I see is that they're seeing other kind of institutions jumping on the technology bandwagon, so everybody's feeling a pressure to jump on as well. But what's interesting out of that is that the focus is more on creating broadcast learning versus really looking at how can technology be leveraged or be used in a more effective way to enhance the student experience and also to create efficiencies. Finally, I think in the education sector there is a general perception that money is not all created equally. In a way, they see that money coming from government is purer, quote unquote, than from business, because when you actually take money from business, it means you cede out control. So these are some of the principles that I think often aren't talked about, that actually need to be surfaced, and there needs to be dialogue around it. I think where there would be real value add is to have further discussion around some of the value proposition that each sphere brings to our higher education, and some of those underlying values, some of the things that we just discussed, where the gaps are and where there's actual alignment. I think that one of the really interesting things that probably warrants a dialogue is around what is the goal of higher education. And whenever you do this, there's many goals. So you might have a goal of, oh yes, to create better workers, so vocational, to create better citizens. All of these kind of things need to be looked at, but the relative weighting needs to be assigned to each, because they are not always going to be complementary to each other. There is going to be a need to look at where are you going to put your investments. And I think finally, when you're talking about these forces for change, one of the voices that's missing so far is really the student. And I think you can't have kind of business or education speaking on behalf of students. You really need to look at enlisting the voice of the student in looking at some of these forces, but also enlisting their help in how to address some of these challenges.